You are listening to Down Home. You've all heard the term Uncle Tom used as an insult, a label for a black person seen as a traitor to their own people. It's a phrase deeply embedded in pop culture, shaped by books, films, and everyday language. But where did it come from? Who was the real Uncle Tom? The truth behind this term is rooted in the life of Josiah Henson, a man who endured the brutality of slavery and escaped to freedom in Canada. His life story was twisted and commercialized by minstrel shows in Uncle Tom's Cabin, a novel that both exposed the horrors of slavery and perpetrated damaging stereotypes. Today we uncover the true story of Josiah Henson and how his legacy was distorted by racist portrayals. Henson was not the submissive figure history turned him into. He was a leader, an abolitionist, and a champion of freedom. His real story deserves to be told. I'm Derek Wise, and on behalf of Jay Jones, welcome to Down Home, the Canadian experience by two black men.
Breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground.
All right, so you wanted to cover Josiah Henson, like even last season, I think you were talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just sort of popped up in some articles I was reading, and it struck me that the correlation between his life and Uncle Tom's Cabin, the book, where basically it was like basically a memoir of his life, and I thought it was interesting to in the sense of what I thought to be an Uncle Tom in all its negative sort of connotation. This actually had the opposite effect. And this actually was an important book because it was also a book that actually was the main character was black. And he also was shown to have a little bit more noble and more of a moral compass as a quote unquote Christian than the white men depicted in the book as his overseers or owners. So, and that wasn't really far-fetched from the actual book, the actual inspiration of his life. Like it wasn't far from that, you know what I mean? So I just thought it was something that I knew about the book for sure. I actually have a copy of the book. I think I read it back in high school back in the day, but I remember it being hard to read because it was sort of written in broken English at the time, spoken in that sort of dialect or phonetics. And I remember it being a hard read, but I also remember the teacher. It was one of the books that they told me to read. And and at the time it was also in 1852, it ended up being one of the first books to be actually banned.
Yeah.
So that with all this sort of book banning that's going on today, once again, it was a book that depicted the reality of slavery. You know what I mean? In all its unglorious form, and I think that tugged a lot with a lot of people's moral sort of compass in those days and what they were actually doing.
Yeah, definitely. Like the man himself, Josiah Henson, was quite interesting. So he was a community leader, a minister, a property owner, a business owner, and he was one of the first abolitionists.
Yeah,
as well, right? Honestly, the guy was amazing. Josiah Henson was born into slavery on June 15th, 1789 in Charles County, Maryland. As a child, he witnessed the brutal treatment of his father, who was severely beaten and sold to the Deep South after attempting to defend his mother from a white enslaver. Separated from his family, Henson was later sold to Isaac Riley, a plantation owner in Montgomery County, Maryland. Despite enduring very harsh conditions, he was entrusted with additional responsibilities by the enslaver. By 1830, Henson realized his freedom was unlikely after discovering that he was lied to and tricked by the enslaver while trying to buy his freedom. So he took his family and fled, traveling over 600 miles north to Canada. There, he co-founded the Dawn Settlement, dedicated to helping freed black people build new lives. His autobiography, published in 1849, later inspired Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, amplifying the fight against slavery. He actually ended up living here in Canada, in Ontario. And him and his wife lived and died here. It seems to be like a common thread amongst a lot of the abolitionists. They made their way to freedom. A lot of the abolitionists went back to the States once slavery was abolished.
Yes.
But Josiah and his wife actually lived their lives out here in Canada.
Yeah. One of the greatest moments out of some of the research that I did was him actually reaching Canadian soil and rejoicing with his family, finally feeling like a liberated man after buying his freedom, because there was it was a long road for him to even get to Canada. So, and even after that, it was a long road because he was also he wasn't very educated, but during that time, he was able to put some money together and buy some land, do some things, set up a settlement, and send his son to school. And in turn, his son actually helped him to read. So, and he, with his sort of moxie and community ability and leadership skills, he became a preacher as well, a Methodist minister. So he was really described as a jovial older man later on in life that could just really sort of move people. And he was able to speak on some of these abolitionist roots. They had roots, and the settlement, the Dawn Settlement in Ontario, that was actually the last stop on the Underground Railroad.
Here in Ontario,
here in Ontario.
The interesting story about him buying his or attempting to buy his freedom. so he actually he was leased out by his original slave master. But when he was leased out, he actually earned some money.
Yeah.
And he went back and he said, okay, I would like to purchase my freedom with this money that I'm earning. And so he gave, I think it was $300. And then
$350 actually.
$350.
Yeah.
And then he actually wrote or had the slave owner write a promissory note for an extra $100. And then but the thing is, because Josiah was illiterate, the slave owner put an extra zero on the end of the promissory note. So, back in those days, the difference between $100 and $1,000 is astronomical, right?
Well, big time, man.
So, literally, he was not going to be able to pay that off, right?
Yeah.
So that's when he actually decided, okay, listen, I'm going to grab my wife and we're heading to Canada.
Yeah, because sadly for him, what he didn't want to happen with his family happened to him, and his family, they got separated, what I mean? But he was actually able to go back with his mother and some of the siblings because he was the youngest child, because he fell deathly ill, actually, but then was able to sort of gain the strength back and reach the ranks of being highly esteemed on the plantation.
Yeah. So he actually wrote his memoirs. That's what was the impetus, what's the word I'm looking for, man?
Inception or something?
No, not well, anyway, that's the actual author of Uncle Tom's Cabin, Harriet Beecher Stowe.
Yeah.
She used his memoirs as inspiration. That's the word.
Yeah.
That's bad, man. She used his memoirs as inspiration for the character of Uncle Tom. So he didn't see any money from that, even though Uncle Tom's Cabin was a bestseller at the time, back in the mid 1800s.
Yeah.
He didn't see any money from that. But what it did was it enabled him he went back to his publisher of when he was here in Canada, went back to his publisher, and they republished his memoirs,
Hmm.
and he took that money and bought the freedom of his brother
Right. Oh,
with
awesome. Yeah.
with that money that he for republishing his memoirs. So
Yeah.
this guy's amazing, man. Like the
Hmm.
like we already discovered what the negative connotation was, and it was basically, once, like you were mentioning, once that Uncle Tom's Cabin became so popular, the establishment, the white establishment, actually took that and flipped it, to start creating these minstrel shows, right?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Minstrel shows emerged in the early 19th century, around the 1830s, becoming America's first truly national form of entertainment. White performers wearing burnt cork to darken their faces acted out exaggerated and offensive caricatures of black people, depicting them as lazy, foolish, or overly happy in their enslavement. These performances were meant to amuse white audiences while reinforcing racist ideas about black people. One of the first and most famous minstrel performers was Thomas Dartmouth Daddy Rice, who created the character Jim Crow in the 1830s. Yes, that Jim Crow, the name that later became synonymous with segregation laws. Rice's act, where he imitated an enslaved man dancing and singing, set the stage for an entire industry of blackface performances that would dominate American entertainment for over a century. Minstrels didn't just spread racism, it commercialized it. These shows became wildly popular across the US and even in Europe. As blackface minstrels evolved, new stock characters emerged like Zip Coon, the buffoonish free black man, and Sambo, the contented enslaved black man. These demeaning portrayals shaped how generations of white Americans viewed black people, reinforcing dangerous stereotypes that justified discrimination and violence. Uncle Tom's Cabin, published in 1852, Harriet Beecher Stowe's anti-slavery novel, was a sensation. It exposed the brutality of slavery, and for many white readers, it was the first real encounter with the horrors enslaved people faced. But when theaters adapted the book into stage performances, known as Tom shows, minstrel tropes took over. The character of Uncle Tom, originally a dignified and deeply moral figure in the book, was twisted into a submissive, docile caricature in these performances. He became another stereotype, a figure who was happy to serve white people, reinforcing racist ideas rather than challenging them. These distorted portrayals in Uncle Tom's Cabin adaptations helped cement the minstrel tradition, keeping blackface alive well into the 20th century. Even as films took over as the dominant form of entertainment, minstrel-style performances persisted, influencing movies like Birth of a Nation and Gone with the Wind. The racist tropes minstrel shows created evolved, shaping how black people have been represented in media for decades, still influencing pop culture now.
then therefore the negative connotation came from that, and that's what people of color often had to fight in those times, because it was always stereotypical. You might not have been that person that you were stereotypically viewed as, but because of the conscience back then, you were viewed as that. It was
Yeah.
really a crazy time, and I always viewed Uncle Tom as being that sort of uppity Negro, that host Negro, that and from my knowledge, and I'm sure it caused a lot of contention between the slaves that were working in the fields and the people that were in the house serving and doing all those things. I mean, that came with its own craziness as well, but it just created this divide,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it continues to do so on some levels today.
Yeah, but honestly, the book Uncle Tom's Cabin was actually an inspiration for abolitionists.
Yeah,
Abolitionists.
yeah,
The character itself was actually pretty positive in the book. So this bastardization of Uncle Tom by these minstrel shows, and that character of the hunched over, speaking broken English, uneducated, doing whatever the master says to please him, and like turning his back against his fellow person. That
Mhm.
comes from these white men in blackface in these
Yeah,
minstrel shows.
yeah. It's
That's
crazy.
where this and like widespread,
Yeah.
right? This connotation of Uncle Tom.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And also, one thing that being a Canadian, he also served in the militia, and he was
Hmm.
also the first black person to be put on a stamp in Canada.
Yeah.
Which I mean, I'd always seen his face like on the stamp, but I never put two and two together. But I guess doing this podcast and researching like we are, it just sort of starts to connect the dots to some things that we already know, but takes it to a deeper place of the really ins and outs of where it all came from. It's yeah, I didn't
Yeah.
know his story was prolific as it was. It's a movie, like the
Yeah, exactly.
you know.
And like, hopefully, let's do our part to reverse this negative connotation of Josiah Henson,
Yes.
because this guy, he's a hero.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely what's the word I'm looking for? Inspiration.
Breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground.
You have been listening to Down Home. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, yeah. On a high plateau, from the one down below to the future of the funk, getting lost in the flow. Contact with the spark magex. Now it's time to flex with the force from the soul, reaching all aspects, getting deep, no time to sleep. As you reach your next phase, laying it all on the line. New trails start to blaze. It's a fire inside, a brand new path, breaking down the sum to one. Feeling free, I just laugh with the joy.
The song Breaking New Ground from The Breakdown.
Like magic prescribed, only to see the perfect blend, like a diamond in the rough, ready to drop a perfect gem. It's time to shine so fine to see what you find. Revolution.